Hi. Last video in this series, I told you what Battletech is. I told you where and how to find it, what to do with it, what it do. And with an established budget, we worked our way through a list of items necessary to make your first start collecting and painting your very first Battletech miniatures. Now, in this video tutorial, I will show you how to, using the materials gathered in the first installation, bring your miniatures from bare gray plastic to battle-ready and storied figures fit for any game table. And we will find out how many people here are just watching for entertainment and how many of you who are following along possess what your dad didn't when he said he was going to bring back milk. The ability to follow through. Let's get started. Here we have both our models, our hobby knife, a bag of rocks, and some random bullshit. Now, you're going to want to use just a very slight little of that super glue to attach your miniatures to some larger object, such as these scrap wooden blocks, which I had lying around. I have used plastic shot glasses, old paint bottles, a hamster, or if you're really desperate, you can use a rock for like here. Okay, I'm not putting this in the budget. This is only something that you use to get a better grip on your model without handling the figure itself and potentially damaging its paint coat or else contaminating it with the oils from your skin. I did this at the first step, which made the next like 3 things significantly harder than they should have, so I would actually recommend doing this right before you start to paint them instead of what I did. This is a cup of soap water. We are going to dunk our models in the soap water and use a used toothbrush. Look, I didn't put the brush or the cup in the budget. If you don't have a used toothbrush, I don't even know who you're like a gremlin or a toothless hobo or some shit. If you're not normal, okay? And you're not gonna go out and buy all this stuff and then whine because it's not on the budget. All right. Using our toothbrush, we will gently brush away at our miniatures in order to relieve them of the oil-like releasing agent which is commonly remaining on these injection molded models to aid with their detachment from the original metal cast in which they are formed.
Where's the money, Lebowski? You want that money, Lebowski? Where's the fucking money, shithead?
It's down there somewhere. Let me take another look.
If left unchecked, it can often interfere with paint adhesion, and often it's an extra but helpful step before you paint any model regardless. We then dunk them in non-soapy water and dry them off to the best of our ability. I am now using monkey paste with its brush applicator to spread a rough, inconsistent coat around the feet of both mechs on their bases, and using this pot of Hero Arts brand sand-colored embossing powder. Okay, fine. I paid for dirt. I did it. I did it. It was a long time ago. It was stupid, but I have it now, and I'm going to fucking use it. No, it's not the budget. Don't pay for dirt. You should put your dirt and gravel in a Tupperware or some jar-like container and dunk the base of the miniature in it, but I had the minis glued onto the blocks already, so I had to spoon it on like a...
I'm a dumbass. Oh.
Please enjoy me not doing this in a way which is intuitive or in any way cohesive whatsoever. Please stop making fun of me. Finally, use your $3 X-Acto knife to scrape away any mold lines. These are artifacting which is present from where the two halves of any mold come together to form a seal wherein the plastic is injected and leaves a small crease along the edges of the model. You can use the sharp end, but that can cut into and mar the plastic if you're not careful, and honestly, it's actually easier to use the back end. Yes, you are in fact not even using the knife portion of the knife. I then took them outside with the lawn or ground or whatever you have covered with some parchment paper so I'm not painting the fucking planet by accident. After pretending as if my can of Krylon is a newborn infant that somebody has handed me by shaking the fucking piss out of it, we are now ready to start painting. If I could only get it open. It's still trying. Okay, there we go. I do a couple test sprays in the canvas, and so should you. This is to gauge the rough diameter and volume of whatever spray can you have chosen. The optimal distance should be between 8 and 16 inches from your target. And finally, tentatively, I give my Vindicator a gentle spritz. You may notice that he is only very slightly dusted. This is not only fine, this is good. While I wasn't there, I don't think that Raphael painted the School of Athens in one day, and you shouldn't try to do any model in one coat. By overspraying with any device, you will make your model dripping, sticky, wet, and like myself, 9 out of the 10 days that I wake up, unacceptably fugly. Gently, slightly coat one and then alternate between models to allow one to dry whilst you get the other. Ensure you are spraying from all angles on all 3 axes. Get the front, the sides, from the bottom, the top. We're not looking for everything to be a perfectly even white powdery coat, we're just looking for a moderately well covered miniature so that when we start brushing with acrylic modeling paint it has something of a base to stick to. This is the job of a good primer, and spray cans are almost always going to be the very best at this. It is okay if you have to wait for your models to dry. I enjoyed the unmolested beauty of God's green earth in between takes while my models did. Doing a little bit at a time and pausing is going to net you a far better end product. Afterwards, my hand looked like this, so you may consider wearing a latex glove if you, like me, have contact dermatitis, but instead I simply chose to suffer. Your after product should look like this. White. Again, not necessarily solid white, but powdery white is sufficient for achieving proper adhesion. First, the Griffin with its army painters. By peeking into the bottom of my bottle here, you can see it's not fully mixed. Unfortunately, this being an older bottle, there's no bearing present, so I have to absolutely thunder cunt the thing to make this work. Such is life. We're gonna put a pea-sized amount on my makeshift palette. You can use anything for a palette: Tupperware lid, plastic sheet, ceramic tile, tinfoil, anything works. Because I didn't include pipettes in my list, I am now using our brush to seep up some of the water from my cup to mix into the paint. This will also give you a good idea of the fluid volume your brush can hold. This paint seems fairly thick with, like many army painters I have encountered, some flow improver included based off of the acrylic smell and glossiness. I will attempt to reach somewhere between a 6:1 to 5:1 paint to water ratio. I mix with a toothpick and not the brush to preserve its bristle integrity, but you can use any stick-like item. It's not always clear what exact ratio paints need to thin properly to flow well and dry evenly, nor is it a fixed figure. It changes across brands, formulations, colors, and even batches. Over time, you will learn how to feel it out yourself, but it is very difficult to explain mechanically, which is why I'm offering the exact brand, colors, and showing the approximate quantities I'm adding for your information. When mixing and dipping in paint in general, it is bad form to have paint go past the halfway point, and really I try to keep 2/3 of my brush clean. This is because the base of the bristles are both far harder to clean out and also cause foundational issues when clogged, which will hamper the brush's ability to keep a point all the way towards the top. Do not completely load your brush. Use roughly the quantity I do here. You're not trying to paint the whole miniature or even a whole limb. I do an uneven first coat upon the back angle of my Griffin, and then, once I've covered some ground, I dunk my brush in clear water, and rather than mashing or rubbing my brush into towel or tissue, gently roll and pull it across my paper towel like so. This motion greatly aids with the maintaining of, once again, the tip, allowing your tool to remain accurate for significantly longer in its lifetime. Just like any other tool, if you treat your brush well, it will treat you well in return. You will need to continue the dipping and brushing motion on the towel until all blue is out of the brush so it does not dry and clog the fluid flow, and then begin anew with fresh paint. It is important to note that your goal should not be to cover one area once with your brush. Much like with a spray can, if you keep covering a patch of wet paint with more paint, it will become too drippy and smeared and develop a poor texture. Rather, apply some, move on to another area, and come back when the first patch is dry for the application of a second thin coat. If you are in this hobby for any period of time, you will hear the phrase two thin coats and thin your paints thrown around at an extremely high frequency. I've always found that virtually everybody is willing to offer that up as information, but unable to clearly explain how or why to do so. It is because doing both of these correctly helps to mitigate the loss of detail inherent by adding a layer of any substance upon a sculpt. The number one thing most new painters struggle with is attaining a smooth coverage on their miniatures, and is always something that everyone, myself included, can improve upon. I got my Griffin to a roughly half and half pants scheme, kind of common to the Battletech setting, where mini mechs have a sort of heraldry assigned to them, such as the Lyre and Heavy Guard with their famously 1/3 white, 2/3 blue color schemes similar to this. Even if you plan on coating your whole mech, practicing filling in each individual panel separately, as I do here, is key. It makes no difference on the final product. What it does do is help you train with the accuracy of your brush and grow your ability to paint within the lines, so to speak. Another thing to notice is that I am utilizing the block as a painting handle to its maximum effect. He is secure, and I am confident in shifting and pivoting my model every which way in order to reach under the arms or between the legs. Do not ever assume a static painting position when you can avoid it with small miniatures like this. I am steadily doing this mech block by block, chunk by chunk, until I reach his head, where I leave the white of the canopy bare, as depicted as significantly different from the painted metal armor of the War Machine. Something to always remember: the eyes are the window to the soul, and on figures like this, even a mech, focus is always going to naturally congregate towards the head. I now start all over again in the same order, applying that second coat, and I'm just trying to eliminate the patchy white undertone that you see here. I ran out of paint and make sure to refill it, thin, and clean my brush as necessary, and after 2 whole thin coats and a little patchwork cleaning up any suspect spots, we have this product. And even as I'm showing it off to you, you can see that I clean up a bit in his arm socket, showing that it helps to put your mini down sometimes and look at it again with fresh eyes a couple minutes later. Our next step is to clean off our palette and crack out the blue tone, giving it a good shake. Now, blue tone is a wash. With washes, we're going to forget mostly everything I just told you to do. You are not trying to achieve an even covering. You are not trying to add multiple coats. The purpose of washes is to be a thin but well-pigmented mix which is loose enough to seek out recesses and darken them, highlighting that detail and really bringing out the features of the sculpt. With anything but the most absurd amount of wash in your palette, you won't want to use anything more than just a little drop of water as thinning, because chances are it isn't thicker than you want it to be out of the bottle. Simply brush it around the whole model gently as before and allow it to seep where it will. If it is pulling heavily in any raised surface, you may want to pull it away with your brush, as if it dries heavy, it may turn into a fat droplet puddle looking thing, which you don't generally want. Other than that, Army Painter generally formulates their washes to seep enough but also not be running to the point where they get out of control, so you're not particularly pressed as far as technical skill and application here. Even before it's dried, you can really see the detail being brought out as opposed to before, and after a quick time lapse of me letting it sit for about half an hour to fully cure, you can really see how much nicer it looks. We're going to take this chilled can of Arizona iced tea, I believe this was the lemon raspberry flavor, and we're just going to gently crack the tab open and have a sip. I changed out my paper towels for color corrective purposes in the video. You don't have to do that. Then had myself a Butterfinger bar. This is all to remind you that hobbying is a time-consuming and engaging effort which can work up an appetite over time, so it's good to take breaks and reward your diligence. I'm also a fat ass. Now notice how good this looks already, and we're not even on the essential step which ties this all together yet. Before we get there, it's really important that washes, more so than most paint, aren't particularly durable in any way, so as such we're going to take some of that matte clear coat mixed with just a little bit of water, and we're going to first actually test just a little bit on the base and then a very small part of his foot. This makes sure it's not going to react in any unforeseen ways with the wash or paints present on the model already, which may cause flaking or frosting and ultimately hose the whole thing and the negligible work we've done up until this point. If it's just a foot, you can paint over it. In a little bit after I'm confident that we're Gucci and the Coochie, I apply a layer over our whole model. It may look cloudy, but it's a clear coat. It dries clear, I promise. We're still putting it on thin like paint, by the way. Afterwards, our model is actually a lot flatter and reflecting much less light, and it's much easier to make out detail and execute the final step on the figure, mine and now your secret weapon, a thorough and even dry brushing. We're gonna put an even smaller amount of this Griffin blue on our palette, and we're not gonna thin it. Cracking open our makeup brush, this one I happen to grab from the Dollar Trees from the brand, we're gonna get about this much on the very edge and then smear the whole thing all over the towel, ridding it of all but just the slightest amount, and then gently using just the very fringe edges of the brush, you see when I graze the rigid edge of the base how it catches and turns bright blue. Yeah, this is a timeless technique which has been heavily abused since before you or I are around and will persist until the inevitable death of the universe and potentially beyond, given its sheer efficacy. It's not necessarily the most noticeable shtick yet, but after slightly wetting our brush and ensuring we get all the blue out once more, we move on to the brighter electric blue, and repeating that same step you've now practiced, you really see how much this actually brings out. It's a big difference with such a small amount of effort. Note that my brush wasn't even and had one or two stray hairs here that were much longer, and I ended up using my hobby snips to trim it to size as if present. These may mess up the pattern that the brush lays down. This product looks excellent, but no miniature is ever done until you base it, and coming in with Banshee Brown, we're going to do exactly what we did with the blue and give it a couple thorough thin coats, and finally another coating of matte clear coat to protect our work to finish up your first Battletech miniature. No, it's not a coincidence that I chose Griffin blue for my Griffin mech, and it is is a very serviceable toned down light blue, which really works for the War Machine aesthetic as almost a naval camouflage. Moving forward with the knowledge we have, it's not mechanically wildly different when painting our second color scheme on our Vindicator. In my experience, once again, Vallejo type paints are just typically better mixed with a consistency more allowing for coverage as well as easier on the allowances for how much or little you can thin these before significantly impacting performance towards the negative. Red is a very strong but typically pretty transparent color as far as paints go, requiring more than a couple of coats, but here this carmine red does an excellent job of establishing a strong enough layer on the first go. You can catch me once again filling in panels one at a time as it's a habit worth getting into. I think about it like getting a little XP with every plate or polygon painted, and after every miniature you'll find your ability to keep paint where paint goes leveled up. As a demonstration of this ability, I leave some of the panels on this mech, the barrel of his right arm particle projection cannon, a stripe on his left wrist, and finally the crown on his head white, as though this mech has some form of battle markings as opposed to one consistent painted coat. Coming back with a second coat, you can really see the richness of this color as I fill in the chest. Unlike Griffin blue, I have never used this paint before filming this video, but I could be certain that the product is not only acceptable, but above my standards based off of the strong confidence I have in this brand. Some touch-up work after the second coat once again, and man does this mech look clean as a whistle and vibrant as a new car. To rectify that, we have our bottle of dark tone, just a simple black wash. Army Painter's line of washes is wildly consistent across all the ones I've used, and before they recently expanded their range, I had actually bought, owned, and used all of them. Their density, flow, and workable to dry time are all similar enough that they don't feel different, and if you've used one, you know what to expect with the rest. Something to note is that with washes even more than regular paint, you need to regularly and even more vigorously clean out your brush in between applications over several implements. This is because the recess-seeking nature of the wash means it can seep up into the base of your brush, once again drastically diminishing its ability to hold a tip over time. Many miniature painters, such as myself, have a dedicated wash brush used for nothing else for this reason, as to not degrade their primary detail brush. The same goes with metallic paints, which, with their metallic flakes being like glitter, virtually never fully get cleaned out from in the bristles of your brush and are harsh on performance, which is why I did not include any metallic paints in the list for this video, in spite of their excellent coverage and color. As switching from a metallic to a regular paint, you'll often see glitter in your stuff, and we were only buying one brush. Red, being the way it is as the most dense waveform on the visible spectrum, it takes a pretty dark wash to make those recesses more evident than a thick bright crimson. This is plain black, but a very dark brown also works and complements the red excellently as well. When you just have a little puddle of almost dried wash, as you can see here, I just add a little more water, which helps to reactivate it and seep it up into my brush to use just that last little bit out of my palette before refilling to save on resources. On the white of his crown, you can really see what work the black puts in here. I waited a minute and made sure to leverage my advantage with that needle-like tip to get more black into the recesses on the head to really accentuate the line details physically sculpted into the mech. One drying time lapse later, I actually came back and did just a little bit more before allowing that last bit to dry and once again applying our clear coat. The clear coat is matte, by the way, because with my experience with all Army Painter washes, the final product, as you can see, is pretty glossy before we dull it back down, and I prefer a much more flatter, vibrant finish where the color values aren't being obstructed by reflections of light. You can see you've really got to trust that this shit dries clear, because man does it look like some grade A spoiled milk before that. Now Vallejo Scarlet, unlike my new Carmine Red, has always been and will be my go-to red for almost everything. As a dry brush highlight, you see the excellent job it does at highlighting just about everything raised on this mech. You can also see how much pigment is left even after I'm done brushing. It's very vibrant, so you can use it sparingly, but I don't. This looks great, and not for nothing, the Army Painter's Banshee Brown does probably the best job out of any of the paints here that I've used today, with an acceptable coverage on the first run through when I'm doing the base here. One clear coat later, final stretch now, we're going to take our hobby knife and gently stick it under the base and slowly leverage off our mechs from their lightly glued attachment, then shaving off some of that paint which is left from where it dried between the base and the handle and flaked off, leaving us with this. Okay. Yeah, not to pat myself on the back or anything, but both these schemes, which I did not practice or have any visual reference for, both go hard. They've got that freshly painted and clean aesthetic like their newly minted weapon systems piloted by recruits ready for action in their first battle. Perhaps a Davian Armed Forces Griffin has been tasked with the intercepting and destruction of an Op 4 Taurian Concordat Vindicator. Or perhaps these two are best friends in a mercenary company ready to jump into the thick of it in a dangerous contract which requires their combined piloting prowess. It's up to you to decide the story of your figures, which I hope through this guide, even if you didn't strictly follow every step or use the exact same paints, have turned out to look excellent and well executed, as somebody could hope for following a very high effort YouTube shitpost. But one way or the other, now you're good to go to forge your own destiny with your painted Battletech minis and engage in a creative, academic, and ideally but problematically social hobby, which is by far more vast than this or any other video could even hope to convey. In spite of that, I hope that this has been a helpful and educational video series for any newcomers. I can't count the number of times I get comments about, I love your painting videos, I wish I could paint like that, frowny face. Well, now I have a video to point them to and nobody has an excuse anymore. That means you right now, Josh, you f***o, you lazy shit. And if you've watched this far, please do scroll down and touch buttons because it will make my dopamine go boing boing. Until next time, I don't f***ing know how to write outros, shit.